I took the world's largest artists and turned them into the smallest type of Lego set that you can imagine. In case you didn't realize, today we're talking about Taylor Swift. I was lucky enough to be able to finally snag tickets to the Taylor Swift Eras tour after months and months of trying. That's me right there, Sydney. A fun fact about me is that Taylor Swift was actually my first ever concert. So when Stormy Those, a custom brickheads designer, reached out to me and said, hey, do you want to build some Taylor Swift brickheads? I could not decline. Throughout Taylor Swift's multiple eras, she has had so many iconic outfits, with a personal favorite of mine being this ringmaster look from the end of the Red tour. But for this video, I really just wanted to focus on the Eras tour and the concert outfits that are shown within that tour, because even with that alone, there are so many different outfit colors, options, and different types. Firstly, let's discuss the plan. Now, the show is kind of divided up into 10 different sections, 9 for 9 of her different eras, and then 1 which is the acoustic set, but that also kind of represents her first ever album. That gives us 10 total looks to recreate, so we divided it into 2, with me doing 5 and Stormy Those doing 5. And the ones that I chose to replicate were Lover, Reputation, Red, Folklore, and 1989. Now, kicking things off in the order of the set list, we have Lover. The Lover bodysuit is one of my personal favorites that she wears throughout the show. She has 4 different versions of this outfit too, and each of them are custom made by Versace, and they are completely gorgeous, filled with a ton of sequins and rhinestones, and are just absolutely stunning. The 4 different colors include white, gold, purple, and pink, with my personal favorite being the white one. So if I was going to replicate any, it had to be that one, and I feel like it's kind of the standard Lover one as well, as it's the one that was featured on the Eras tour movie poster, the movie itself, and it's usually the version that she picks for the first night in any city that she goes to. Now, like I said, this bodysuit features a lot of sequins and rhinestones, and this by far was the most difficult costume to replicate, but was also the one that I found myself being the most excited for. Starting things off, I replicated her custom Louboutin boots, and as much as I really want to include the red sole on them, it just would have made her too tall and a little bit out of proportion, so I ended up just going with this light bluish gray brick. And since brickheads are kind of short and stumpy, I really wanted to try and make her legs look as long as possible by using tan pieces to make it look like the bodysuit was kind of high cut, and then having a white piece placed right in the middle to give it that sort of bodysuit leotard swimming costume type of thing. When thinking about how I was going to attack this project, my first thought was to use a bunch of studs. Now, I wasn't sure if I was going to use a bunch of snot techniques in order to stick the studs on the outside, or if I was going to stack them on top of each other to try and replicate it. So I ended up trying out both options and eventually ended up going with the stacked on top version, because stuck out, I feel like it just didn't make it look sequined and shiny enough. For the color scheme, where possible, I really wanted to use translucent blue studs, but for the most part, it consisted of white, purple, trans blue, and light pink. But the hardest aspect of this suit was the fact that it was pretty low cut, and somehow I needed to replicate that while having it still look like it was made out of sequins, so I ended up having to build the entire top half of her torso upside down. That thing is not falling out anytime soon, which is really nice. However, because the bodysuit is made up of a bunch of studs, it is a little bit fragile. To accessorize, of course, I had to give her microphone, which I ended up giving to every single brickheads that I ended up making, and the Lover bodysuit was all done. Next up, let's talk Reputation, because this is my second favorite outfit that she wears, and was the one that I thought was going to be the most difficult out of all of them. Turns out it was really, really easy. Between Stormy Those and I, we decided that it would be best for all of the Taylor Swift brickheads to have the exact same hairstyle, since throughout the concert her hair doesn't really change unless it's kind of humid and it gets a little bit curly, so it felt best to kind of have some consistency throughout them. So Stormy Those came up with the hair design, and that is really how I started building the Reputation bodysuit. Now, for Reputation, there were really only 2 colors that stand out to me, being black and the giant glittery red snake, which is so cool. And I borrowed the same idea of using the translucent studs to represent some sequins from the Lover bodysuit with the Reputation snake, only using trans red in order to replicate it wrapping around her entire outfit. This was so easy to do, and also a lot of fun to kind of watch come together. The only part I struggled with this outfit was the coloring of her left arm. I was like, do I go with dark bluish gray to represent the mesh, or do I just stick with black? And ultimately I just went with black. So with that in mind, I continued the black all the way up to the neckline as well. Since the left arm on the Reputation bodysuit is pretty much all mesh up until her wrist, and then the microphone that she holds has this like giant snake pattern that kind of wraps around her her hand, I decided it would be best just to keep the whole left arm being black instead of having that little tan clip and finishing it off. But after I finished this model, it gave me so much confidence to go and do the rest of the outfits. I feel like it looked like a 1-for-1 replica almost, but I'm definitely the most proud of this build. I think it looks fantastic. Moving on to what I consider to be Taylor Swift's best album of all time, let's talk about Red. Red is one of the only eras of the concert where it has multiple outfits throughout the set, so there was many to choose from. So I decided to go with the classic and very iconic, not a lot going on at the moment, 22 hat look, which even then there are 3 different versions of that t-shirt. But if you didn't know, at the end of the song 22, Taylor Swift actually gives the black hat that she's wearing to like a random audience member, and that whole thing is a really cool moment and is another reason why I really wanted to do this outfit. Starting off, I just did her black loafers, and then for the most part the t-shirt was really simple. I stacked a bunch of plates on top of each other in order to represent the kind of words and letters on the t-shirt, and made sure to have that little red accent in there, unlike the version from the actual 22 music video. But the big challenge for her was actually the hair and the hat. Even though I used the hair template to start off with, because I wanted to do the 22 hat on top of her head, I had to kind of completely rework the sides and the back of the look. When I was tossing up designs for the hat, there was one thing that came to mind, and that was Woody from Toy Story. A while ago, Lego actually released an official Toy Story Woody brick head, and he has his giant cowboy hat, and I just thought this was the perfect inspiration to use. So I pretty much just took that hat off my brick head Woody and reverse engineered it in order to make a fully black version for my Taylor Swift. Using the sides of Woody's head, I was able to kind of make a couple of adjustments to Taylor's hair. However, due to the pieces used, specifically the wedge pieces that were on the side of her head in order to make the hat fit, I had to get rid of a lot of the bumps and the textures that were on Taylor's hair, and it kind of looks a lot more flat. Underneath, there were a lot more plates compared to the other models as well, so I kind of had to figure out how to make that quite structurally strong because I didn't really want it to be as weak as the Lover bodysuit was. And despite a couple of sacrifices being made, I feel like it turned out pretty good. Next up, we're going into our storyteller era as we're talking about Folklore. For this outfit, Taylor uses quite a similar type of style of outfit to the Evermore era, going for a floor-length dress. However, due to a lot of the choreography that she uses throughout this entire era, specifically during My Tears Ricochet, she has these really large droopy sleeves, and there is just a lot of fabric on her. The dresses come in a variety of colors and have a lot of layers, but since Folklore is typically associated with the color white, I thought it was only fair to replicate that dress in particular. And like the Lover bodysuit, it's the one that was featured in the concert movie, so it kind of just felt right. Unlike a lot of the previous outfits that relied very heavily on studs or plate pieces, the Folklore dress required me to use a lot of different sloping pieces. Now, specifically since this was quite a long and flowy dress, I tended to use and gravitate towards the curved pieces so that everything would have a really nice shape to it overall. Starting off at the bottom though, I used some cheese slopes in order to create that very bottom layer of the dress, and then stacked some slope pieces on the top to kind of give the dress a little bit more texture. I used a couple of different snot pieces in order to get the dress to stick up, and it took a lot of different trial and error as I used a bunch of bracket shaped pieces, I used some snot bricks, and eventually I ended up going with snot plates in order to get the height of this brick head to be correct. This was my biggest challenge when it came to the Folklore dress because I needed the brick heads to all be the exact same height, but with how much detail I felt like I really wanted to add or even needed to add to this brick head, half the time she ended up being a plate or two way too tall. I was trying to create a lot of the flow and the motion that this dress had, and the one thing that I really feel like was able to do that was the giant sleeves that she has. I also tried to replicate a little bit of this sequin beaded detail on the dress by using some bracket pieces and some tiles in order to make the chest a little bit. I don't think it necessarily worked too well, but at the same time it just made it a little bit more interesting at the front so it didn't feel so 2D since I don't have any printed bricks to use like regular Lego brick heads. But there you go, Folklore girlies, that one's for you. And then my final brick head to tackle was 1989. This album is so nostalgic to me and has some of my favorite songs on it, so I was really excited that I was able to create this brick head. To me, 1989 is probably one of the best outfits that you can do because every single version of it I think is just an absolute slay. Now, since 1989 was the last brick head, I'd had a chance to look at some of Stormy Tho's different versions, and one thing that really stood out to me was how he ended up doing the Fearless dress, and that was my inspiration in order to try and replicate the 1989 dress because somehow I felt like I really needed to make these tassels work. My first version of this included having tassels going all the way around and having a little bit of a longer skirt. However, it kind of looks like a hula skirt in the words of Stormy though. Since he's a more talented designer, he just took the project on himself and created this really cool Taylor Swift version using some of the techniques from my build, as well as implementing a couple of different techniques that there is no way that I would have thought of at all. With the 1989 suits as well, there is a little bit of a different shade of color underneath all of the beading. So in this case, to try and replicate that, I actually ended up going for light bluish gray to kind of give it a little bit more depth. This one is almost tied with Lover for being the most difficult one to create. Something fun about this build in particular though is that it should be pretty easy to do color swaps of this if you wanted to make a green version, an orange version, and definitely the pink. And once I was done with all of my Taylor Swifts, I felt that there was one thing missing, and that was her supporting act. In Australia, we entirely lucked out for once because our opening act for Taylor Swift is Sabrina Carpenter, and I absolutely love her. She is so funny, she's adorable, she's beautiful, and her songs are absolute bangers. So that being said, I really wanted to give some respect to my girl Sabrina and create her own brickhead too. At the Melbourne shows, her outfits were cool, but none of them were super iconic the way that the Argentina Love Heart custom little bodysuits were. And like Taylor Swift, there are a couple different color variations that she has. We have baby pink, baby blue, black, and there was even a red one for the Jingle Bell Ball, which was really cool. But as cool as the red one is, we're talking Eras Tour, so I wanted to go with black and try and do the baby blue as well. I started off with black because the blue color that I really wanted to use for this is called Very Light Blue and is really rare and doesn't feature a lot of pieces, so I thought it's probably best to start with the black. Now for this one, there were a couple things I really wanted to include. The first was this little heart-shaped tile that exists in Lego, which luckily comes in the tan color in order to create that little cutout. And the second thing was to try and replicate the sash at the very bottom. However, since this is kind of like a bodysuit, really mini dress, I didn't want to have that sash be too long that it looked like it's a lot longer on the brickhead. Luckily, I managed to make it all work using a bunch of jumper pieces, some snot bricks, and using these really nice 1x4 wedge pieces. For Sabrina's hair, since she has quite a similar haircut to Taylor Swift, I used the Taylor Swift kind of blueprint and just modified it a little bit, giving Sabrina her curtain bangs and also just kind of switching it up a little bit based on what pieces were available in this bright light yellow. Luckily for me too, you can build the entire outfit in that very light blue with a couple small modifications. However, those wedge pieces, turns out they're only in one Lego set, so it's not super easy to do, but it's possible. So again, I made a couple modifications so you can see the vinyl version. But with my brickheads done, I combined them with Stormy those to bring you Taylor Swift The Eras Tour Lego version. We have my 5, which are Lover, Reputation, Red, Folklore, and 1989. And then to wrap it all up, we have Stormy those 5, which includes Fearless, Evermore, Speak Now, the acoustic set dress, and of course, Midnights. I absolutely love how they turned out. I think every single one of them is a really well done replica, of course, with Reputation being my absolute favorite of them. If you wanted to build these for yourselves, don't worry, Stormy those and I did make instructions for every single outfit, so you can find them linked up here. But if you enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up, consider subscribing to my channel down below, and until next time, I'll see you later.